It carries on, guys. It just carries on. The baby reindeer theories are popping up all over the place, and a lot of them seem credible. They do seem credible. This video emerged by the real Martha, I suppose I should say allegedly, in which she is complaining about the state of her flat in Camden and threatening to report the Labour Council who run that particular borough. And as you can see in this video, her curtains do indeed need hanging badly.
Here, I'm going to post a series of videos to let you know exactly what Camden Council and the Labour Party and Keir Starmer and Helena Kennedy, who control that Labour Party in Camden, are like. The amount of tenants and owners of council property they've actually killed, and what life is like living.
Now, putting Martha to one side for a second, people are also starting to speculate about who the producer, writer, TV guy may be from episode 4, whose name is Darian. Now, I'm not going to speculate on any of the theories about this because I'm well aware that I could get into serious trouble for that. And I also don't want to put any spoilers out there for those of you who haven't yet seen episode 4, which is a very harrowing episode. Nevertheless, I'm surprised and shocked at how quickly people are to put names out there, and I can't see any evidence to support it, and I do recognise some of the names. Nevertheless, let's move on from that because I wanted to share this with you. So, an actress, actor, person on Twitter has decided to share their experience of auditioning for Baby Reindeer. I believe that's what they're talking about here. I don't see what other show it could be. And it's in the Baby Reindeer trending category. Now, this is interesting. It's not like major shock, but it is perhaps not a great reflection on Richard Gadd, if it is Richard Gadd who the person is talking about in this Twitter thread. Now, it might not be. It's all alleged, but I don't see who else it could be, judging by how many characters there are in the show. But again, allegedly, let's have a look at this together, see what you think. So Reese Lyons has put this out there publicly, so we can quite happily talk about it. I believe a trans actress has said here, in light of recent conversations surrounding a newly released Netflix show, I decided to come forward and share my experience with this individual through the casting process. Please read the thread below for further context. I had met him in the bar after one of my shows. He was with a friend. They both approached me after my performance to congratulate me, and that's when he offered to buy me a drink. But before I could respond with my usual no thanks to the offer of a drink from a man I did not yet know, I recognised him. He had followed me on Instagram a month prior, at the very beginning of the run. That's when I realised this wasn't a chance encounter, but he was specifically here to speak with me. Sure, I replied. We split off from his friend and he began to tell me about his upcoming Netflix show that he had written. The role in question was that of his ex-girlfriend, a trans woman. She's called Terry in the show. I didn't treat her the best, he said. I wondered what that meant. I told him I was interested in auditioning and asked him to get in touch with my agent at the time. But there is one other thing, he said. What? I replied. I find you really attractive. But you want to audition me to play your ex-girlfriend who you mistreated and date you at the same time, I thought. Not knowing that this lack of sense of boundaries would soon become one of the first of many signs I was dealing with somebody who has potentially exhibited cluster B personality traits in which there are 9 diagnostic criteria. The following day I decided to read the play the series was based on. I found myself awestruck and yet simultaneously horrified. I was amazed by the bravery and candidness with which he spoke about the varying degrees of trauma he'd been through in his life, yet I also couldn't help but notice in all of the situations he was the common denominator. But what I found particularly troubling were the ways in which he spoke about how he mistreated his trans ex-girlfriend, hiding her in secrecy, and the ways in which internalized transphobia and shame could coexist with desire. Would he treat me like that, I thought. The next week he asked me out on a date, and I said yes. I was mindful of the overlap between the upcoming audition and the romantic invitation, but I knew I needed to ask him more questions. I think you have a tendency to fetishize trans women, I said tentatively. Suddenly I was met with an intense and emotionally dysregulated reaction. He was highly defensive and dismissive towards my observations I had to share with him. Where is the person who spoke so bravely and candidly about his own psyche and his work, I thought to myself. We left the date and a week later I texted him to end things prematurely. I said that I didn't think the conflation of the upcoming audition and dating each other at the same time was wise, and he said that he understood. But 2 weeks later he spontaneously called me and said he wanted to try dating again. I felt conflicted. I'd set clear boundaries, and at the time it appeared he understood them. What if I say no, I asked myself. Does that mean he would feel slighted and I wouldn't get the chance to audition? I decided to say yes, and quickly found myself pulled back into his emotional chaos. It astounded me how somebody who spoke so openly and poignantly within the context of his career about how a power dynamic with an older and more established writer quickly led to an abuse of power and the devastating effects this had on him, could then in turn become the very same person who recreated a strikingly similar power dynamic with me years later, where I found myself 10 years his junior, now auditioning for his show. Your audition was exceptional, he said as he consoled me over the phone, but it's out of my hands. Netflix is looking for somebody who's already a star. But what about us, I asked him. It's not going to work. You're too confrontational for me. And that was it. Now you can find the whole thread on Reese's Lions Twitter page. Have a look. There's a bit more there that I haven't read out because there's quite a lot to read out. I have to say though, very good writing. Good use of language. This is not an English essay, sorry. I don't know why I'm marking it like some weirdo teacher. But interesting there that they point out how Richard Gadd, if it is Richard Gadd, and who else could it be because it's based on his play, he wrote it, it's his show, treats them a bit like his girlfriend in the show, Terry, and I'm kind of rather amazed because it doesn't seem that he's learnt anything, but also that he's putting himself out on a limb. He's doing this, but perhaps not thinking that what he's doing, i.e. the Netflix show, is going to give him public exposure and mean that people are going to know who he is. And maybe he wasn't counting on the show being as successful as it's been, but I don't know. What did you make of this story? Again, it's not abuse. You know, there's nothing terrible really happening here. It's just strange and a bit weird that you would go up to someone and say, I want you to be on my show for Netflix. By the way, I also fancy you. I think that's a bit of a risky move. Carrying on with the Richard Gadd theme, he has been asking people to stop. Stop trying to find out who the real Martha is. Stop trying to find out who the real characters are in the show, and said that's not the point of the show. But the problem is, he's rather shot himself in the foot, I think, by coming out and saying, this is my story, it's pretty much true. And what he's also done, he set it in a part of London that it all took place in. He's talked about the venues he visited. There's footage of him at these venues. We have recordings, allegedly, of Martha at some of these recordings. So I really think that if he hadn't done that, it'd be fine. But he has. If he just set the show somewhere else, if he says, you know what, I know it all took place in London, but I'm going to set it in Liverpool, then I think people probably wouldn't bother looking, because they'd be like, well, it's in Liverpool, I don't know the connections or how to make the connection. But the trouble is, you've probably got a lot of Londoners who know all these places and think, okay, well, I know where that happened. I was there that night, blah, 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 blah. Do you know what I mean? So I think he really should have perhaps thought a bit harder beforehand. And again, people are curious. When I watch biopics about people who've committed crimes or who've had interesting lives, I then go and look them up online. And if they're still alive, I find their current Instagram page or their current Twitter, see what they're up to. That's normal, you know? Love and Death with Elizabeth Olsen, I went to find out what happened to the characters in that show. Some of them are still alive, doing interesting stuff. There was that Andrew Garfield show, Under the Banner of Heaven, based on a real case within the Latter-day Saints Church, which I also got interested in looking up. Some of the people involved in that are still alive. So these people, you know, it's not unusual to do this kind of thing, but people seem to think we should stop doing it. Well, the thing is, let's also say perhaps the showmakers should put a disclaimer before the show and should also have thought a bit harder. I said that in the last video. Enough of my waffling, guys. Hope you found this interesting, and catch you later. I've no idea where, I just thought I'd say that.